Okay, last time I talked about why Rule Zero has been a disaster for RPGs, mostly because it not only gives too much power to DMs, worse, it gives DMs too much responsibility. It asks them to over-prepare, to craft things that they don't need to craft, to ask things of players they don't need to ask, and essentially, it compels DMs to create story games instead of games, if that makes sense. And what I mean by that is DMs shouldn't be trying to tell stories. They should be running games. DMs are there to be arbiters of rules, to manage secrets and fog of war. And so something that comes out of this over-preparation in a Rule Zero culture or mindset is the idea of Session Zero. And the reason Session Zero is such a problem is because it presupposes a whole list of things that a campaign typically never runs into. And I'm not sure where Session Zero comes from. It's probably some kind of online D&D influencer community. I mean, you see this quite a bit where D&D influencers will have their Session Zero checklist that they insist you follow if you're a DM, that you should ask players what they're comfortable with instead of just opening up the rule book, reading the rules, getting good at the rules, and running the game as rules as written. It does really ridiculous things like makes human beings, grown people usually, think about things that they're never going to encounter in the game, like how should we deal with sexual content? Now, I played in a lot of D&D campaigns, and I have not dealt with sexual content in a game since I was 12. So, in your game, sure, you might have sexual content. Again, like if you're listening to this, there's a good chance you might have some counterexample to anything I say, but I'm basing this off of quite a bit of gameplay as an adult. I'm a Gen X. I'm pretty old. So I played in all the editions. I played in a lot of different campaigns with a lot of different groups. And it almost never has sex in it. It has combat in it. It has some social interaction in it. It has exploration in it. But no one's out there trying to sex an NPC being run by the DM. It just doesn't happen. And I'm harping on this because it's the most blatant example of Session Zero checklist stuff. And there's plenty of others as well, but there are a bunch of things that a Session Zero should deal with, namely the rules, how to play, and this never happens for some reason. A Session Zero, if you're going to have a Session Zero, you should be dealing with, okay, here are the rules, here's how to run this game, and we should be running through all the particulars of the mechanics of combat and how to make dice rolls, how to handle edge cases, that sort of thing. And instead, we're dealing with all sorts of narrative nonsense that just isn't relevant. And so, for that reason, we should just be skipping Session Zero. Because really, Session Zero, if you're sitting down with a group of players in an RPG, you're playing the game. So there is no Session Zero. You're playing. Now, if you're talking about the game beforehand, well, you're still playing, you're just metagaming. It's just straight up metagaming. So, just like if you were to sit down with a complex board game like, say, Gloomhaven or something, typically you just don't dive in and deal with the content of the game. You have some time where you go over the rules, learn how to play, and there's like a procedure that you need to learn. And that procedure is really what you need to be focused on in a so-called Session Zero, not how to deal with narrative elements that you probably won't ever encounter. And this has just come straight out of this Rule Zero mindset of the DM being in charge of absolutely everything, having way too much on their plate to prepare, which then, as I spoke on before, leads to DM burnout and ultimately the demise of the campaign. The reason campaigns end is because somebody, typically the DM, gets burned out. And I'm advocating for a style of play that wouldn't allow this. If the DM gets burned out, you either don't have a DM or you find another DM. And again, this idea that the DM is the god of the world is one that kind of needs to be rethought, needs to be radically rethought, in fact. And I think that what this creates is, these players who consider themselves forever DMs, like they are always the DM no matter what, and they're never the player. And you always see this, they kind of bemoan it a little bit, but they're also proud of the fact that they're forever DM. And everything hinges on their schedule, on their capacity, on their creativity. And really what we should be striving for is equal engagement by all players. The same way if you were to play a board game, and a complex board game. I'm not talking about, casual games, but, games where the players really have to invest a little bit of energy into playing it, being good. It usually works, if one person can't make it, well, you can still play it usually, unless you just don't have enough players, but, it... And I understand the difference between RPGs and board games. Like, you need this GM, DM role to manage the secrets. But, you have, what's, in Hero Quest, who's the guy, Commander Zardoz or something like that, who is running the game. I know that's not right, but, there are other games where there is a controller or a moderator or facilitator or something, and it doesn't place the same responsibility, doesn't lay everything on the DM to keep the game running. And so we've got to find a way to get around this. And so the reason I'm focusing on session 0 is because it just mistakenly sets up bad expectations from the beginning, that the DM asks the players, okay, what are you comfortable with? What do you want to see? What don't you want to see? And it mistakenly creates this illusion of choice in the players where they had no opinion on these things before, but now that it's presented to them, well, now they have to think up an answer of like, well, how do I want X-rated content handled in my RPG? Like, knowing full well we're not going to have X-rated content. We're just going to be fighting and exploring and whatever. So the point here is we need to de-emphasize the DM. We need to... It's going to sound aggressive against DMs, especially the forever DMs. They're going to really take this personally as like, how dare you rob me of my creativity? But the very same DMs who often want to have these session 0s also don't like extensive backstories in characters. And I don't quite understand the motivation here. I mean, I am a DM as well. I run games. And I guess my philosophy is you should show up and play a game. There are rules that you read, and you learn those rules. And then even if you're not playing pre-published adventures or modules or whatever, you kind of ask, the session 0 is, all right, what do we want to do here? And the easiest answer is everybody starts together, and then you go off exploring, and eventually you need to run into some danger, and then off you go. It should be self-fulfilling. It should run itself at that point, because as the players gain power and influence and treasure and all of that in the world, it should motivate the next steps in their progress path. And a session zero undermines this somewhat because, you know, there's all these preconceived notions of what we are and we aren't going to be doing. And it also contributes to the Mother May I syndrome that I spoke about, where because the DM is setting themselves up to be this omniscient narrator, well, now the players are constantly seeking approval from this person. And I don't mean characters looking to do character game mechanics in the game. I'm talking about friends relying on another person in their social group for approval. And this is just kind of a dynamic that is not, I wouldn't say it's unhealthy, but it's not constructive either, where the people who are most socially compelling usually get their way the most. And it really should be everybody should be on equal footing. So like if you're a wizard and you have, let's say, or say you're a fighter with low charisma and you're not very good at social skills. Well, you know, that's why you let the thief or whoever has a high charisma or the warlock or whatever do the talking. And those should be rolls, I suppose, like ROLL, like dice rolls. But what often happens is the person who is having the best day, like say you had a bad day at work and you're just not feeling it, well, you should not be penalized in game because you're just tired. You should be able to play the game. I mean, sure, you're going to be tired and you can't play a game as well. Like, I get that. Like, you're just not going to be in it as much. But you should not be penalized for, now, you see this all the time where you'll have like 4 or 5 levels and everything's going really well. And then everything starts to fall apart. And you have this entire session, 4 hours of no dice rolling, no combat, and it's all social interaction where you're just trying to like tie together everything that you weekly put together narratively. And you have this big session where you're just talking and talking and talking. And if you just happen to show up at one of these sessions and you're just not feeling it, well, then you don't get to play the game that day. Through no fault of your own, really. And I know you might be thinking like, well, that's on you. You need to come prepared or whatever. But, you know, I think a lot of people just want to play a game. And to me, the heart of a game is making strategic decisions that interact with the rule system. And if you're just trying to convince Peter, the DM, or whoever, Jane, the DM, that you should be able to do what you want to do, and there's no dice rolling, or worse yet, like this begrudging, like, okay, go ahead and make an insight check or whatever. It wears the whole thing down. It degrades the entire experience. And this comes straight out of Rule Zero, Session Zero mindset of the DM has total control, is in charge of absolutely everything, and you need to placate them or you need to play to them. So I've seen this a lot where a DM will hand out inspiration for good gameplay. And this is horrible, because if you happen to know the sense of humor of the DM and you can make them laugh, then you get inspiration. I mean, this is just not right. And again, maybe that's not in your game, but I've seen this time and time again. So, what do we do about this? It's hard to say. I think I'm advocating for a more gamist approach. Again, I think I said this last time, but let's play a game. Let's not get trapped in this narrative approach where we have a story that we're trying to tell where, oh, there's a secret bad guy doing secret bad guy things, and it's the player's job to figure out what those bad guy things are. So they, fight a bunch of monsters, and then they find a clue, and then it just, the secrets of the world the DM tries to insert them subtly to be really clever about it, instead of just giving you the clues. Instead of just, okay, yeah, you roll and oh, you got this clue. That would be a game play approach where you find the clue. And in a board game, you'd get a clue token or something. But in an RPG, the DM just tells you something, and you're expected to remember this, and it's just, and worse yet, they'll give you a bunch of false leads to try and be clever about it, and it just ends up as a confusing mess. And because they're trying to sneak in all these things that they established during session 0, and it's just, it's muddled, and we need to kind of get away from this, I think. So that's one thing. Now, I think the new school versus old school dealt with this in different ways. And so I don't think there was session zeros in AD&D. I don't think anybody in 1979 was having a session 0. You just showed up and you just rolled up your characters and you just hit the dungeon, and that was, you were gold. And then from there, you just tried to gain in power and influence the world. And you'd have a bunch of random tables, and that would just feed you new encounters. And the game ran itself, essentially. And you just, you needed a DM to adjudicate and run the monsters and whatever. But now it's trying to slyly write a story at the same time. And new games try to solve this, and OSR games try to solve this by inventing new mechanics, and it rarely works. I mean, I think a lot of these new indie games are great. They're more art project than game, oftentimes, but you'll see this a lot where it solves one particular problem, and a group will see that, and it'll be so refreshing because, oh, we had all these problems in our old campaign, so we're going to try this new system that solves it. And it lasts for a few sessions and then peters out, and it never lasts. And that's why I think Shadow Dark is great. I haven't really played it, but I don't think it's going to last very long because it's too thin. I mean, it's just too thin to make a campaign last. So what you need to make a campaign last is strong gameplay elements. And that's what I'm trying to advocate for here, is strong gameplay elements, and let the narrative elements happen as they will, not trying to force them through DM fiat and rule 0 and session 0 of sending out surveys to players of what do you want to see in this, and I'll try and work it in. I'll try and write in your ideas. That's not what we're trying to do playing a game. Remember, this is a game. We're playing a game. Let the game happen.